Welcome to the podcast summary of Carte Opera Company. This one's about how a Victorian opera company built an entire ecosystem around a very specific kind of entertainment, and somehow made it last for more than a century. The Carte story has big hits, backstage discipline, copyright fights, family succession, and a long tug-of-war between keeping tradition alive and letting it breathe. And underneath all of that, it's really about a smart production machine that turned Gilbert and Sullivan from a partnership into an institution. Richard Carte wasn't just trying to mount a few successful shows. He wanted a permanent English school of light opera that felt respectable and family-friendly. That mattered in 1870s London, where the alternatives were often bawdier burlesques or imported French operettas, and Carte saw an opening for something homegrown with a different tone. The key move came in 1875, when he paired W.S. Gilbert with Arthur Sullivan for trial by jury. What could have been a short filler piece turned into a 300-performance success, and that basically proved the partnership had real staying power. Then HMS Pinafore blew up internationally, and Carte made another crucial decision. He ditched unreliable investors and formed a profit-sharing partnership with Gilbert and Sullivan themselves, so the trio controlled production, casting, and repertory. A lot of companies have hit shows. What made this one special was the level of control it built around the shows. Gilbert didn't just write librettos. He supervised staging, design, and movement, and the creators picked performers to fit the material instead of building productions around established stars. That gave the operas a very specific feel: precise comic business, strong musical polish, and a kind of naturalness that sounds obvious until you remember how theatrical theater could be back then. The Savoy Theater, which opened in 1881, was built for this company and became the first public building in the world, lit entirely by electric lights. So yes, they were making comic opera and casually living in the future. Carte also modernized the whole audience experience with numbered seating, free programs, queuing systems, and a no-tipping policy. Backstage, the mood was much stricter. The company had firm conduct and moral rules, enough to earn the nickname Savoy Boarding School. It sounds a little severe, but that discipline helped produce the consistency people came to associate with Savoy opera. The company didn't stay a London phenomenon for long. Carte ran multiple touring groups at the same time, mixing London seasons with trips around Britain, America, Europe, and Australasia. By the 20th century, the main company was touring roughly 35 weeks a year on top of London performances, which is a serious amount of suitcase living. Carte also licensed the operas to amateur societies and overseas companies, and even rented out orchestral parts and prompt books. That turned professional performance into a training system. It helped amateur theater grow, and it made Gilbert and Sullivan self-sustaining internationally in a way most repertories never manage. There was also a very practical reason to think globally. American copyright law didn't initially protect foreign authors, so after Pinafore took off, the United States saw more than 150 unauthorized productions. Carte and his partners answered with a clever workaround. They premiered The Pirates of Penzance in New York before London, trying to secure commercial control through an authorized production since copyright alone wasn't going to do the job. After Richard Carte died in 1901, the company stayed in the family. Helen Carte ran it until 1913, then Rupert Carte, and later his daughter Bridget. That dynastic management gave the enterprise unusual continuity, but it also reinforced a central tension. How much do you update a tradition without breaking it? Rupert pushed modernization in some very visible ways. He brought in new designers, redesigned the Savoy in 1929, and backed a series of recording projects. At the same time, he insisted the opera stay faithful to Gilbert's words and Sullivan's scores. That balancing act shaped the company for decades. J.M. Gordon's stage direction and the company's prompt books preserved Gilbert's choreography and bits of stage business so thoroughly that other companies copied them as the traditional way to do Gilbert and Sullivan. At that point, tradition wasn't just memory anymore. It was documented, repeatable, and surprisingly portable. For all the success, Gilbert and Sullivan were never a friction-free pairing. Sullivan increasingly wanted to write grand opera and felt boxed in by the comic operetta formula, while Carte's contracts kept pressing the team to produce new Savoy works. And then there was the famous 1890 Carpet Quarrel, which sounds petty until you realize it was really about trust and control. The immediate issue was a lobby carpet costing about £500 that had been charged to the partnership. Gilbert treated that accounting choice as a test of Carte's integrity, sued him, and won. But Sullivan sided with Carte, and that split permanently ended the original partnership. What makes this even more interesting is that the machine kept producing results for a while. The Mikado became their longest-running Savoy hit with 672 performances. Still, later works like Ruddigore and the Grand Duke showed the limits of the formula. Even a hugely successful institution can't guarantee that the next show will land. One of the company's smartest long-term moves was recording. It made its first complete Gilbert and Sullivan recording in 1917, and later kept going through acoustic, electrical, high fidelity, and stereo eras, along with film and television versions. Those recordings preserve performance habits that live theater can easily lose, even if some early recordings used singers who weren't active company members at the time. They also helped the repertory travel beyond the touring circuit, which mattered as taste changed and the economics of theater got harder. The company was also a talent pipeline. Performers like Henry Lutton, Martin Green, John Reed, Valerie Masterson, and Kenneth Sanford became closely associated with D'Oyly Carte before moving into wider careers in opera or musical theater. The original company presented Gilbert and Sullivan almost continuously for 107 years, from trial by jury in 1875 to its final performance in 1982. That kind of longevity is astonishing, but the financial model eventually stopped working. Year-round professional touring got more expensive, public funding didn't arrive, and the old structure became unsustainable. When the final Gilbert copyright expired in 1961, Bridget D'Oyly Carte transferred the company and its assets to a charitable trust. The trust preserved the repertory, recordings, scenery, and performance materials, but endowment income and private donations still couldn't keep up with mounting losses. There was a revival from 1988 to 2003, using shorter seasons, smaller ensembles, and guest stars instead of the old permanent company. Those more experimental productions upset some traditionalists, which feels very on-brand for a legacy built on inherited prompt books and exact stage business. But later co-productions with Scottish Opera in 2013, 2016, and 2021 to 2022 showed that the legacy could outlive the original institution. The company stopped producing regularly, but the repertory didn't disappear with it. The D'Oyly Carte story is a reminder that cultural institutions aren't kept alive by nostalgia alone. They survive through systems, recordings, touring, paperwork, arguments, and occasionally a deeply consequential carpet. And in this case, all of that helped turn a run of comic operas into something much bigger than a hit series. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.